For want of a better title, I called this lesson Applying the Standards. And there's probably something better that could have been said, but we're gonna discuss some things that may not be readily apparent when you first look into these standards and talk about them. So, first thing we're going to consider is mentality, I guess you would say. And the mentalities are checking off the list versus checking our understanding of the list. You know, we sometimes talk about this same sort of mentality when we think about the worship service. There are some people, sadly, that come and say, we prayed, check. We had the Lord's Supper, check. We sang, check. And that's kind of their approach to the worship service. And in my opinion, that really robs you of the fullness of worship if you approach it with that kind of attitude. In the same way, I think you can do yourself harm if you approach looking at the standards for the eldership in that way as well. So, sometimes we do approach it as that cold list instead of considering. I mean, when you're thinking about a man that's been put before you, you're considering the life that he has lived so far and what he has learned in his life. You're not just looking at a very sterile checklist of things. And let me demonstrate by asking a question. We've already discussed this, but let me kind of tell you what I'm thinking about with this train of thought. For example, must all the elders' children be faithful? We talked about that several weeks ago in depth, okay? And that's, you're going to have to think about that soon. But before you just say yes or no, first maybe you should ask yourself, what is the purpose of the qualification of having believing children? We discussed that at length when we were in that part of the lesson. And the Bible says, a man can't shepherd the church if he can't shepherd his family, basically. And then secondly, apply that purpose to this scenario. Think about this scenario. A man has 3 children. The first one is wild and rebellious and definitely contrary to Titus chapter 1 and verse 6 that says they should be the opposite of that. The man blames himself because he let the child run loose. And all of us that have more than one children, we all remember that first child and we remember what we didn't know, right? And we remembered being worried that we were going to mess it up somehow, because a child is not a widget that you can fix it or so easily or just go get another one, okay? So this man blames himself because he let the child run loose, okay? And after seeing the outcome, he repents and he changes his ways. He said, this was my fault. I didn't do everything that I could have to raise this child up the way the Lord would have had me raise him. So his next 2 children are godly, showing his blameless parenting of them, and that he now knows how to manage his own household. Okay? So, the question for us would be, does this, and I'm not trying to force you into a yes or no answer right now, I'm just kind of getting you to think about these qualifications. Does that man meet the qualifications of what is required to oversee a congregation? And the person that wrote this part said, yes, he lived and learned, and now he can lead. Is an elder going to make mistakes? Is an elder going to make mistakes? Yes. Is an elder human? Yes. So, therefore, The elder's going to make mistakes. What should the elder do with his mistakes when he realizes he's made them? Repent if it was a sinful type mistake and apply the lesson learned. So that's kind of an example of what I mean by checking off the list versus checking our understanding of the list. This particular scenario, the man stumbled at the gate, but then he recovers, right? And he went on to run the race.
What if you had one child, you learned that lesson, but the child was wild the whole time raising? You can't always just bring up these examples and say it discounts the example. If you have one child, the child was wild, went to prison or youth defender home at 16, never obeyed the gospel, but he said, boy, I learned my lesson. That's not how you do it.
Are you asking me what I think about that?
No, I'm just throwing it out there.
Is that the only child?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's a little bit different scenario. But again, though, you have
scenarios to discount the list. The list is what the list is.
Okay. Well, for your example, some people would argue that he only had one child, and we covered that. And if they got over that hurdle, then they said, well, it's not a child under control. So there's kind of two prongs to that one. Any other thoughts? Okay. Next thing we need to understand about the standards is some of them are relative, okay? To a relative degree, at least. Okay? For example, here's one that's not. Husband of one wife. That's not relative. You either are or you aren't. Okay? That is definitely a yes or no question. Okay? But how about this? How frequently must one show hospitality in order to be considered hospitable? If the one person has over, let's say, 5 people a month to their home, and the other person has only 4 people over a month to their home, is the one that has 5 more hospitable than the one that has 4? Is it a matter of numbers, or is it a matter of the quality of the hospitality? And I'm not pushing you for a direct answer. I'm just giving you things to think about. But some people might say, if brother so-and-so name has been put forward to be considered for elders to serve as an elder, someone might say, well, I've never been to brother so-and-so's house, so I don't believe he's hospitable. Okay? Is that the only way to measure the standard?
The Good Samaritan was hospitable. The Good Samaritan was hospitable, and it didn't involve his house.
Okay. The guy never saw his house, as far as we know. Well,
like going to nursing homes or visiting people in other places, not necessarily bring them to you, but you go into them. It's
okay.
hospitable.
Okay. So you can see it's not quite so cut and dry as have you been to their house or not, right? Not quite that cut and dry. You just said these, is there any other evidence that suggests a brother's home is open and that he is willing to share? A better choice there for home might be heart. Is his heart open and willing to share? Okay? I'll tell you what, the third apartment that Elisa and I ever lived in when we were temporarily in San Angelo, Texas, I mean, you could step in the front door and you could touch the walls like this. I mean, you just it was one of these deals where you had to scooch by each other. Okay, not a lot of room for entertaining in the home. you know. But that's not the only way to measure a standard. There's plenty of places to take people to in San Angelo, so that was not an excuse. Some of these are hard to quantify, like I said. For example, we live in a prosperous society. Do you agree? Most prosperous on the planet, right? The most blessed on the planet materially. Okay? So, in our prosperous society, a lot of people have good jobs and they make decent wages. Okay? If they use some of their decent wages to buy a better than average car, does that make them greedy? I mean, this is something to think about, right? Because I've heard my very good friend that I've mentioned quite a lot, he was a veterinarian. He was a veterinarian over in Cummings, so a large customer base. And he was very successful, very well loved in the community, right? So he was successful financially, right? So he himself drove a truck, but his wife drove a Mercedes. Does that make them greedy? Because she drove a Mercedes. They lived in a nice home, and they had people in their home all the time, right? But there were folks that accused him of being greedy because they had nice things. Susan?
I think by that standard, Abraham would have been just a real awful guy.
Pardon?
I think by that standard, Abraham would have been a horrible
Oh,
guy.
yeah. Or Job, or yeah, anybody, somebody.
Does that make those that are concerned about him driving a Mercedes, does that make them greedy or jealous?
Jealous.
Say again?
Do the people that are concerned about them driving the Mercedes, does that make them jealous or?
I would they would be skirting along the edge of being envious, I guess. Ash.
Well, some people kind of have the attitude, and maybe that helps explain them having that criticism. Some people have the attitude that you would have to give up everything you didn't absolutely need. The interesting thing about that is nobody's doing that. Not even the critics are doing that. You know, they don't just eat just barely what they need, or just barely provide their own shelter. There's some degree of excess in everybody's life.
And there's one preacher that I know of that takes the story of the rich young ruler and what Jesus told him. He takes that very seriously, and he said, we're nowhere near doing what Jesus told, and he includes himself in that.
Well, as with greed and a number of other things we've talked about, there's this recurring conversation about perception of these things. Well, whose perception? When does someone need to sell their car because someone else has perception they're being greedy because they have a nice car? And then by extension they would be unqualified to be an elder because they have a nice car. And like we mentioned, being a wealthy country, what vehicle are we driving that would not be considered luxurious in Sudan?
Yeah, well, pretty much all of them would be. And these days, even a plain old car costs so much money that you pass that line between a Chevy and a Mercedes a long time ago.
Does that mean that Does that mean that I can go up to Phil and say, "Can you give me your truck since I'm not going to be an elder?" Because he's got that beautiful red truck. I could try. I'll trade him for my beat up old Nissan.
Well, I'll let you answer that question, but from what I know of Phil, if you needed a truck,
Yeah, he would.
he would do what he could, and if it included giving you his truck, if it got to that, the only way to solve it, I don't have any doubts about his reaction. And I think we just touched on this. Does one man's opinion in this regard establish the fact of a brother being greedy for money? Those people that drive the Mercedes or the nicer cars or whatever, we don't know what else they do, right? How is our giving and our benevolence supposed to be done anyway? In secret, right? In secret. We don't know what else they do. We don't know what kind of checks they're writing, who they're taking care of, right? So just on the basis of what you can see, you can't judge that. Have you heard of the term skinny fat? Skinny fat, right? That's a real thing. You look at someone that maybe looks like, wow, they're nice and slim, but they have a high percentage of body fat. So they're actually not healthy as they look, right? Same sort of thing. You cannot look at the outside and make all the decisions you need to make.
Warren Buffett. Raise your hand if you've seen a picture of Warren Buffett's home. It looks like Archie Bunker's home.
Warren Buffett still lives in his little 1950-something ranch house. Sam Walton was the same way, drove his old truck still. So.
But you don't know the reason that they might have that Mercedes. I mean, I had a husband killed in a car accident, and then somebody rear-ended me badly, and I looked for a car. And my dad said, yeah, the Oldsmobile's good, Chevy's good. I want you to look at the Mercedes because of the safety features. And they didn't say, oh, look at the upholstery, how nice it is. They said, here's a video. It's got built-in roll bars. The engine will go down instead of back at you, and showed me all that stuff. And it wasn't that much more than that Oldsmobile with everything on it. So you have to look at the reason. And I got some side glances, believe me.
Okay. So the point is, quite a few of these, and they're not snap decisions at all. None of them should be, right? The only snap decision, I guess, is he male, right? Is he male? That's about the only snap decision to be made. All right.
Well, I think
Who's talking? Oh. Sorry, I have no awareness of where the sound is coming from.
anybody that's ever applied for a job knows that, I mean, this isn't an exact analogy, but when the market is flush with applicants and you can have your pick of who you want, those interviews are not very good for the one who's applying, because it seems that the boss is looking for reasons to disqualify the applicant rather than when they're really looking for a good person. And when you go into that interview, they're eager to see, they're hopeful that you are who they're looking for. And there's a real, I think, difference in approach in those two things, that we should not have a mentality, I mean, we should be careful, but we shouldn't have a mentality of fault finding and looking that would find tooth combs for reasons that that person's not there, but should have, I think, a more, I don't know, a better spirit about, words are failing me, I'm tired, about investigating this person's qualifications.
Probably never has a decision been made regarding eldership where somebody said, nah, he's overqualified. I would imagine that has probably never been said. Somebody had that.
Just tagging on with what Jeremy was saying, you can make your process so rigorous that no one would submit themselves to the process to become an elder or a deacon in the first place.
Yeah, you can get polygraphs and all kind of stuff. Some opposites.
I wanted to kind of tap back into that too, and just what I was hearing was that there's an appreciation for those willing to serve. Like when there's a look at the applicants, if you will, with gratitude for their willingness and recognition of the need, it's a heavy burden, and that people who recognize that it's a heavy burden and they're willing to take it on, that's a lot different frame of reference in looking at those folks than it is to be looking in this gotcha, catch you, no way kind of manner. Just doesn't seem it's in keeping with Christian love.
If it comes to a rejection, it should be a very gentle and kind and grateful rejection.
We're going to talk about that in the sermon a little bit today. Maybe.
Yeah, and the first qualification, so-called, is that he's willing to, or that he desires the office. And I think, unfortunately, in many people's mind, even though that is a qualification, it's a disqualification.
Yeah.
Oh, he wants to put himself in place over, that's also a kind of a sad snake eating its tail.
Somebody right here, Joe.
We really don't know sometimes what the answer to some of these questions are. Like, we don't know how many people are hospitalized. I don't. We don't know the situations of their children. And I think a large responsibility falls on the person himself. And he knows whether he has problems with some of those things. And I think it's pretty imperative that he search himself pretty well.
Exactly. But part of what you're saying kind of is a nice transition to the next part. We must know the men of the congregation, okay? You've got to know them, right? How will a congregation be able to make a wise decision about its leadership if they are unacquainted with each other, okay? And really, in my opinion, this is just getting worse as society, I don't know if advances, changes, that would be a better word. As society changes, so many members remain so aloof and private and out of touch with not only the everyday activities, but just the members, that they are totally unprepared to make a judgment regarding a man's effectiveness to lead, okay? There are people that we don't see often, right? There are people that we don't see often. The people that you don't see often do not know as much about you as the people that you see and interact with on a regular basis. A goal in basic training is on your last day, when you're standing in your final formation before you're released from basic training, if your drill instructor stands in front of you and says, "Who are you? Have you been here the whole time?" Okay? That's a goal in basic training because you flew under the radar the whole time. It is not a goal if you want to be a leader in your congregation. It can't be a goal. Okay? So, y'all familiar with the icebreaker game, 2 truths and a lie? Right? We ought to know each other well enough to be able to sort of play that game. All right? And we did a little bit of a version of it at Christmas time. It wasn't exactly that, but figuring out some little known facts about each other. Okay? So we have to look at a candidate and say, do I have the confidence to entrust my spiritual welfare to such a man's leadership capability? Can he handle the weight of a local church? Right? If you watched any of those very frustrating Senate confirmation hearings, right? Pete Hegseth in particular, the folks opposed to him, like, you have, I forget what the number is, of people that work for the Department of Defense. I think it was 800,000. It's like, that was a hang up for them. You've never, right? So, I mean, for the Department of Defense, that's important. For the church, it's eternally important. Eternally important. Thoughts or comments on this part? And this has got to, well, let me save that thought. Let me save that. So there can be some what you might call one-sided considerations. All right. Because brethren are often unacquainted with each other, it's all too easy to overemphasize one or more particular traits to the exclusion of others. And that can be for the positive or the negative, right? You can dwell on one. For example, some might just say, well, he comes to church all the time and his kids have been baptized. I think he'd make a good elder. Wow, that's super shallow. If you want to hear my opinion, that is super shallow. And if that's how you're going to make the decision, you probably ought to recuse yourself from making the decision, right? Because we all know that that is not any kind of indication. That is what we might call bare minimums, right? A man cannot be appointed on the basis of a few qualifications with the hope that he will gradually acquire the rest. He's hospitable. He's not greedy. He has a temper, but maybe he'll grow out of that. Right? Can't do it that way. You can't hope. Now, that's not to say that they won't mature, right? It's not to say that they won't mature and get even better. But if you have to say that about someone, he's hospitable, he's not greedy, but he gets mad pretty easily, right? Then it's time for some conversation with the person, okay? Let's see. True or false, Brady? I'll put you on the spot. Serving as an elder will magnify a man's weaknesses.
Absolutely.
Have you learned anything about yourself?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Right. Okay. And it will. It will. Any position of leadership really will. All right. But this is the most important one we'll ever consider. Okay. And if you're not ready, the pressures that will be brought to bear on you in that role, they can overwhelm you. Right? They can overwhelm you if you're not ready. Okay, that's why we don't raise standards higher than God did, but we also don't choose lightly as well. A mishandled situation may become the crack upon which the congregation eventually splits. Does that make you sweat? It should make anybody sweat. Right? It should make anybody sweat that's considering the work.
That is usually the crack that causes a congregation to split.
Do what?
So that is usually the crack that causes a congregation to split.
Okay. All right. There was I was teasing Brady about this a week or so ago. You know, when we had the snow back in January, and school systems were trying to make their decision for what would be the safest thing to do. And of course, on those community social media pages, you know how those go, right? Some think it's great, some think they're sissies, we're raising a bunch of snowflakes ourselves, and blah, blah, blah. You can't make it. I told Brady, I said, I was really tempted to post on one of those. Said, well, if you don't like the decision that the school board is making, then you run for the school board yourself, and your platform should be, I will make 100% of the people happy 100% of the time in 100% of the situations, right? Would people vote for you? Well, some might, right? But you cannot deliver. And even an elder even an elder, again, they're human, right? They're going to make mistakes, right? But we have to choose men who have mastered the qualities to the degree that it lessens the possibility of a mistake. So, what does an elder do anyway? Right? What was that? That old game show where you had to figure out what the person did. Truth.
My line.
That's it.
What's
Who
my
said?
line?
Oh, there you go. What's my line? Right? What's my line? So let's play What's My Line with the eldership here. So even though a congregation has had elders for a number of years, this does not mean that the members automatically understand all the particulars of what must be handled by them on a daily basis. And if we did a pop quiz amongst a bunch of Christians and you ask them, what do elders do? What is probably, we'll play Family Feud right now. What is probably the number one answer going to be?
How to spend the money.
Spending the money, right? Spending the money. Okay, I bet you that would be, the survey says, how to spend the money, right? And unfortunately, that becomes a qualification. Some think of elders as money spenders, so they might think a successful businessman would make a good elder. But some successful businessmen can also be ruthless, right? And that's how they got successful. So maybe not necessarily the best choice, right? Others think of elders as decision makers, so they might be drawn toward a brother who has a college degree. The administration that just finished had people with college degrees, okay? And we kind of see how that ended up, right? We kind of see how that ended up, all right? So that's not necessarily a guarantee of success either, right? Others might see an elder as a comforter, so they might opt for the man who is friendly and outgoing, and that's fine. But is every situation that might arise going to be handled? Well, let's see. I want to make sure I say this right. Is friendly and outgoing going to solve every situation? Right? You gotta, what is that saying? Steel hand and a velvet glove, something like that. Okay?
Discretion.
Right? So a man that cannot put his foot down and say, no, you're wrong, this is what the scripture says, you might need to think about that. All right? So we, and I hope we've done that, need to better educate ourselves on what the duties and the pressures and the challenges upon the eldership are, so that our decisions are based upon the job to be done. Okay? So, one more little section. That's not the way we did it up north. Anybody ever heard that before? Right? We're always hearing about the way they did it up north. And people down in the south don't like to hear about the way that it was done up north. Okay? Our version would say, that's not the way we believed it back home. Okay? Various differences exist among brethren regarding qualifications, some so strongly held as to promote strife and rancor. Do you agree that even just within congregations in the United States, that there are differences in the way they do things and the way they think about things? They are. There's all kind of regional differences. And then when you expand that out into the world, right, the differences become even greater, all right? And some of us have had opportunities to worship in a lot of different places, right? Some of us maybe just one or two, okay? We have to avoid the temptation to impose our personal views upon the group, okay? And the lesson I'm going to preach this morning, it did not exactly go where I wanted it to go, where I thought I was going to take it. So I was standing there Friday washing dishes and thinking about my lesson. And I'm like, this lesson is just not saying exactly what I wanted to say. So I've decided on, hopefully, if I can get it together, if I can get my thoughts on the paper, next week's, today's lesson is solving problems God's way. But I realized washing the dishes, and I haven't really defined what a problem is necessarily. So next Sunday, I hope to bring a lesson that I probably call, Is This a Problem? And a lot of what we consider problems are actually personal views, and we cannot subject them upon the group if they're not, if there's not a scriptural prohibition against it. We do need to be honest with our position, whatever it may be, and question whether there is a substantive scriptural backing for it. Okay? Just as an example, we recently had Caroline and Susan start operating the projector. I personally was not comfortable with that, okay? But I listened to other people's, and I wrote people and talked to people, okay? And they were able to convince me that it'll be okay, that it'll be okay, all right? Now, if we move from that to asking ladies to help us pass out the elements of the Lord's Supper, that feeling's going to come back again, and it will be louder the second time, okay? But that's a personal view, okay? A personal view. I told Brady and Phil that I wasn't comfortable with it, and they acknowledged my discomfort, okay? But I kept looking into it, and I'm learning, I'm working toward living with it. Is it clear-cut, or is there a reasonable alternative view, whatever the matter may be? Okay? Does the majority of the congregation see it differently? Okay, this is definitely something we're going to have to think about. If the majority of the congregation thinks this about brother so-and-so, but you think this about brother so-and-so, how do we get past that impasse? What is the current eldership's judgment? Now, they don't make the choice, right? When it comes to this, they're members of the congregation, right? But if we do reach one of those impasses, then certainly they have input to give, right? And this is important for each one of us. Am I confident enough in my position to withstand a man who might actually be qualified in the eyes of God to lead the flock? Do I feel so strongly about this that I'm willing to stand against that man? Okay, that's a lot to think about. And again, what if this man was the only one standing between a church having or not having an eldership? That's not our case right now, but it could be our case of having an expanded one.
I think that's a very good way of looking at it. Not really standing against the person, but you're standing against the work that God has instructed to be done. And that needs to be very sobering.
Yeah. Now we have an eldership. An eldership of 2 is not as desirable as an eldership of 3 or more. And that's part of the reason why we're doing this. So you have to ask yourself, am I going to stand between the eldership growing or not? Ashton.
Elders are told, and I can't remember if it's what Peter says or if it's in Acts 20, but they're told to take oversight of the flock over the which the Holy Ghost hath made the overseers. And unless we're talking about those men who are being addressed being specially selected, the way that they would have been selected is through the qualifications. And so that's God's way of choosing out who is to serve as an elder. And so absolutely what we're saying, that you cannot stand in the way of that and be on good footing.
Okay. So, and fine, would I still hold to my position if it meant subverting an eldership? Again, that won't happen here, but you would subvert the expansion, I guess we could say, of that. Some people can hold a view for invalid reasons.
The New Testament talks about stumbling blocks. And as we're weighing our discomfort on a particular issue, in terms of whether or not the scriptures are okay with that, we need to also weigh our view against, would we be putting a stumbling block in front of someone else in their ability to serve God? You mentioned ladies doing the projection. We're all very concerned about making sure that roles are done according to the way the scriptures uphold. But we also got to look at, what if we're preventing, in this case a woman, from doing something that she has a right ability to do? We're shackling someone from their ability to serve. The same thing would apply for a candidate for elder, for deacon, whether or not let somebody be a Bible teacher. So you've got to weigh the individual as well. Like, are you putting a stumbling block in front of that person?
Okay, just a couple more. I know we're about out of time here. So, we have to be honest and admit that some views and opinions are regional and generational. There's an old fellow I knew. He was a bachelor all his life. And he was super, super, super conservative. And anytime something happened in the congregation, wanted to change something, like we tried for a while singing a song while we were passing the collection baskets. He's on his phone to his older sister right away, who lived up somewhere near Rome, I think. Well, this is what they're doing. Do y'all do that up there? Kind of thing. And he would bring that back to us. We have to avoid that. All right. Self-will cannot be allowed to hold the congregation hostage and deprive it of the leadership that legitimately exists among itself. Okay. So, I hope this got you thinking about some things. And today's lesson, I was trying to kind of culminate all of this. Okay, as I'll say in the sermon, there is not a clear-cut passage from Scripture that says what to do if you don't think an elder is qualified. Or not an elder, but a nominee, candidate. Okay, there's not a clear-cut passage on that. So I'm pulling some things together from just about how we handle problems in general. Okay, and I hope that will be helpful. And if I get the sermon that I want to do next Sunday, asking ourselves, honestly, is this a problem? Or is it only a problem in my mind? Maybe all three of these things together will help us do the best job that we can do. Okay, thank you.